How many pitch meetings would you schedule a day?
We had them every hour on the hour. So more than likely we would do, so a typical network executive's day is usually a breakfast. Sometimes now, these days, obviously not so much, but I usually would start my day with a breakfast. Then I'd have a 10 a.m. because I was in the office by 10. Every now and again, like a Tuesday morning or a Monday morning, we'd have a staff meeting at some point during that week, probably Monday or Tuesday, where we'd go over weekend read. So we go through all of this material that had come in, or it would be a meeting. So it would be a 10 a.m., 11 a.m., a noon. Then we'd go to lunch, come back, and we would do either at 2:30 or at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, sometimes a 6. Sometimes those 6 o'clocks would end up being, actually at UPN we had 7 o'clock meetings as well. So we had, those were usually within the company, but it might have been a programming conversation with scheduling or with, it would be a budget conversation, whatever it was, but we were stacked every single hour you had something. And that's why I say when you got a chance to, when somebody canceled, it was like, woo, because every single lunch was a meeting. That's another meeting, right? It's not just lunch, it's a meeting. So when I had kids, I would go home. I'd get home by 8. And I usually had to lay down for at least a half hour before I could even be sane enough to see my kids who were about to go to sleep, if they hadn't already. So it's a lot. It's a lot. And then there are also sometimes you have dinners. So it's a constant churn of activity. And within all of that, you are then the last 10 minutes before the end of the last meeting, or at the end of the last meeting, you have 10 minutes maybe, and you can go through some of your emails and go through some of your phone calls and try to return calls and try to reply or read a next script or look at somebody's credits who's coming in to pitch you. So there's always something to do. There's always something to fill your time. It's exhausting. It's exhausting. And then imagine you're managing then the projects that you have already bought. So let's just say I've already purchased, and I'm going to say at Fox, we purchased 65 scripts to 85 scripts a year. At UPN, probably a little bit less maybe, but still probably in the, we're not talking a couple, we're talking, 50, 60 scripts. So we're managing all of that material and giving notes. So some of those are notes calls. They're not all pitches. So there's a lot. And then we have to obviously connect with one another to say, okay, what did everybody think about this before we give notes? So there's a lot of stuff happening during the day when you're a network executive. And it doesn't end on your weekends. You're still doing it on the weekends.
So it's a 7-day-a-week job.
Yeah, I had to, at UPN, I had to make a decision that Sundays were for myself and my family, but that Saturdays I would work. So I took one day. This is even just after I got married. I needed to foster my relationship, right? So I did make sure that I at least had one day for reading material and doing notes, or watching cuts and giving notes on cuts, whatever I was doing. And sometimes you're writing up the document, right? So it's not just like I'm reading a script and verbally giving notes. I'm then writing a document, or I'm reading a document that someone has written and adding my thoughts before we send it off. So there's process. And then at least one day for relaxation.
And was it really relaxation, or you were always available by phone?
No, I was not available by phone. I had to unplug. And that was the stipulation between when I worked at Fox for Tom Noonan, who at the time was a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week kind of person. And I would get these crazy calls so early in the morning. I was not prepared. And I was like, and he had always read everything way before I had. So I had to be really, really fast. And at the time at Fox, I was also the person who had to collect all of the information. This is so old school, but all of the information about everything that everybody else was doing in town. So part of my job, besides going to comedy clubs and doing notes and all of this and reading scripts, was also to canvass the town and do up a report that was, well, Warner Brothers just bought these 3 scripts, and these are the auspices, and this is the log line, and the status. And it was a multi-page document So it was terrifying because I was a person who was like, I got to call so-and-so and whatever and wheedle the information out of them because they didn't always want to give it to you. Sometimes you call the agents, but you had this binder essentially of information. I will say packets of information about what everybody's doing, what overall deals they were creating, who was getting blind scripts, whatever it was. I had to be the rooter outer of all things. So it was, but again, it helped me create a network of people. I suddenly had, 15, 20 people who were my regular contacts that then exponentially, again, grows your network.
And any writer that comes in is always represented? It's never a non-represented writer, like someone just cold pitching?
Well, okay, so things are different. If I'm finding somebody, let's just say I'm finding a playwright, they may or may not be represented, but the material's out there, right? So the playwright has probably produced the play. That's how I probably know of that playwright. So it's not like it's anything that there's an issue with me being able to bring that person in. So sometimes you have to go chase people who aren't represented. But for the most part, people are represented, or they have legal representation, or they come in from a valued source. When I was at HBO, because I was in the diversity department, there was an understanding that if you were coming to me, we didn't need you to be represented. We needed you to sign a release form, but we didn't need you to have all the bells and whistles because we were discovering that talent. And I think a lot of places don't necessarily operate that way. I was lucky that they allowed me that trapdoor where people could fall onto my desk.
How many pitches would you listen to before greenlighting a show?
Well, the process at a broadcast network, it's not quite that. It's not really done that way. Like you said, every year we would bring in a certain number of pitches, and that was determined by the budget that I had. So let's just say for sake of argument, I have $1 million in my budget, and I'm purchasing scripts from a number of different kinds of levels of writers. So some are basically getting scale or whatever it is. They're getting a minimum amount of money because they're brand new. They've never done it before. Or we're getting some super high-end people who've already, knocked it out of the park on another network, and they're coming in to do another project for us. So I've got a certain budget. The budget will run out at a certain point, usually around October for the comedies, or for comedies and dramas. It depends again on how much money you have in your kitty, and then we would always reserve something because there was usually like a heavy hitter that came in like at the very last minute. There would be always something super unexpected that you go, oh, I really wish I had the money for that. So you reserve a little bit something in your pot for that. But when the money runs out, the money runs out. So again, sometimes it's 55 scripts, sometimes it's 85 scripts. And based on that, you then get all your first drafts in, or you get all your scripts in by, I could say your final drafts in before the holidays. So just before Christmas break, you get all your scripts in. You've already done a draft or two, so you know what's looking good and what's not looking good. And then when January comes around and you're back in business after the holidays, that's when you make your pickups and decide, okay, of all of these, I have enough to make maybe 10 pilots or 13 pilots or whatever the number of pilots are. And at a certain point, sometimes you might not want to do a full pilot. You might want to do a presentation. You might want to shoot a few scenes to see if it's something, but you don't necessarily need to shoot the whole thing. There are times when you must shoot the whole thing because it's the only way you're going to really know if you got something. So we would decide, we're going to do 3 pilots and 4 presentations based on the money again. And then you'd make your pickups based on those things that panned out. And it's, then you go into pilot craziness. And all of a sudden you're off to the races with everybody else, and you're looking for directors, and you're looking for studio space, and you're looking for your actors, and you're competing against all the other networks that somebody might want to go to before they want to come to you. And you're doing your best to scramble to get, to get the very best package that you can, the very best, team of people.
And how are you choosing some of the staff writers?
Well, that comes after you get the pilot done. So let's just say then the pilot gets shot, edited, you see the rough cut, you go back and you give your notes, you polish it up, and by May, when the upfronts were coming up, you then have, you know which ones you were putting on your schedule and which ones you're going to hold for mid-season as mid-season replacements. And then you go out and you announce it to the world. And somewhere in that April delivery of the pilot and the pickup to series is a couple of weeks where you pretty much know what's going to end up on the schedule, and you've sort of tipped the hand to the people who are producing those things, and you go, all right, it's looking really good. You should probably start to read some scripts and get some stuff, or it's on the bubble, or it's not going to work out. And then that's the problem of the showrunner, to go assemble that team and start reading people. And because we've worked with a lot of writers, we will have an idea of kind of who we would like to have in that group. And if the showrunner's amenable and meets and likes those people, then great. And if they don't, they might have their own ideas. It's a little bit of a negotiation to decide, who's going to get on staff. Now that I've been a writer in a writer's room, I think I even know even more how important it is to get the right group of people, and how much the showrunner really needs to rely on particularly the people at the top who are going to execute that goal even when they're not in the room. I knew about it before, but it's like you really see it in action when you're sitting there, in that writer's room. It's really important to have the right mix.
That's interesting. So what does that mean when someone's not in the room and they can execute, so they can then give notes over the phone, or?
No, I just mean that when you're running a show as a writing showrunner, there's other things that you have to take care of. So you are also, when you're launching your show, you're doing your press, you're in the edit bay doing post, you're managing your talent, you are putting out fires left and right, you're talking to the network, you're pitching new stories to the network and the studio. So there's a lot of other things that happen. That's why the showrunner is so important. And then you might have a head writer who is taking care of running the physical room while you are handling other things. You may also be that person who must dip back in. You might have a non-writing executive producer who might handle all of that. So when I was executive producing a show, it was a drama series, we handled a lot of the other things. We were in the edit bay all the time. We were selecting the music. We were doing the spotting. We were doing the color correction. We were in the post world, but we were also dealing with, we had a costumer who was cycling out. We had to get a new costume designer. We had, crew changes or other issues. We had to figure out, what does the poster look like? So there's other decisions that have to be made that have to go along with the show, the physical writing of the show. So there's a lot of, kettles boiling.
Sure.
I know I'm mixing my metaphors like crazy.
No.
Okay.
Now I'm getting a better picture of it. Right. Okay. So you've got the writer's room.
Right.
They're there 14 hours a day, I guess.
Well,
ish.
They come in at it's a 10 to 6 kind of job. I think.
Okay. All right. Maybe.
Although there are legendary shows where they just never went home. Like they went home for a minute to shower and then came back. But those are old stories.
Sure. So maybe 8 to 10 hours if we're lucky.
Sure.
Okay, so that's its own sort of moving part, and then you've got all these other decisions that you're making, whether it's the poster, press, color correction, things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and managing the machine.